Hi everyone, Neviriah here with another Diablo 4 video. Today I'm going to share with you some tips and tricks for tackling Nightmare Dungeons, one of the most challenging and rewarding endgame activities that you can find in Diablo 4 right now. If you're looking for a way to test your skills, level up your glyphs, and get some of the best loot in the game, then you will want to pay attention to this guide. Nightmare dungeons are harder versions of the regular dungeons that you can find and enter while playing through the Diablo 4 campaign or entering them on your own during your adventures across the open world of Sanctuary. Each season will have a different set of dungeons that can become nightmare dungeons, and while their core objectives won't change, players will have to contend with lots of extra elite monsters. Additionally, nightmare dungeons also ramp up the difficulty with various affixes called afflictions that empower enemies with unique modifiers and stat buffs. To unlock nightmare dungeons after you beat the campaign, you will first need to get access to World Tier 3 Nightmare difficulty. To do this, swap to World Tier 2 Veteran if you weren't already playing on it, and complete the level 50 Cathedral of Light Capstone Dungeon in Kyovashad. The Capstone Dungeon is pretty difficult and has several bosses, so make sure that you are around level 50 and that you're geared up with your best items. If you have friends playing the game as well, you can also group up to do the Capstone Dungeon to make it a little bit easier. Once you are in World Tier 3 Nightmare difficulty, you will need to find Nightmare Sigils. These are consumable items that correspond to specific dungeons and can only be used to access that dungeon. They also come with randomly rolled positive and negative affixes that add one specific benefit and multiple debuffs to create an additional challenge. You can find night messages by completing Whispers of the Dead objectives for the Tree of Whispers in Hazar. Once you have completed a Tier 3 Nightmare dungeon, you can also craft them at the Occultist vendor by salvaging unwanted sigils into sigil powder and using this powder to create higher tier sigils. Talking about tiers, nightmare sigils come in a variety of tiers, indicating how challenging they will be, how many negative affixes the player will face, and how rewarding that dungeon will be when completed. You will get a Tier 3 Nightmare sigil by completing Tree of Whispers bounties in Tier 3 Nightmare difficulty, and by completing a Tier 3 or higher Nightmare dungeon for the first time. And you will get afterwards you will get a priority quest that unlocks the ability to salvage and craft your own sigils at the Occultist. Tiers go very high, but you will need to unlock World Tier 4 first by completing the level 70 Capstone Dungeon before you're able to tackle any tier above 20 in the Nightmare Dungeons. Completing higher tier Nightmare Dungeons, of course, awards better loot, more experience, and faster progress in leveling up your glyphs. Glyphs are special items you can socket inside the Paragon board and that enhance your character's power by granting bonuses to your active skills or just as a passive buff to stats or damage numbers. Additionally, each glyph has its own experience bar that fills up as you complete Nightmare Dungeons. You can choose which glyph to level at the end of your Nightmare Dungeon run. Once a glyph reaches max experience, it upgrades to a higher rarity and unlocks new effects, as well as the radius of sockets around the glyph is higher. Now let's talk about some quick tips and tricks for you to make the most out of your Nightmare Dungeon runs. Manage your affixes. Positive affixes can enhance your character's power, making the dungeon easier. For example, dealing additional frost damages or getting reduced cooldowns on your abilities through killing enemies. Negative affixes can hinder your character's performance, making the dungeon harder. So look out for affixes that suit you or simply farm Nightmare Dungeons tiers that you can easily clear and kill no matter the affix. The tier of your Nightmare Dungeon determines how many times you can revive during your dungeon run. Check out the amount of revivals available either before using the key or just after starting the dungeon, simply so you know how often you can die. Unless of course you play hardcore, because then you should never die anyway. Unlock the ability to craft or salvage sigils. You can do this by completing a Tier 3 Nightmare dungeon for the first time. If you did not find a Nightmare sigil yet, complete objectives for the Tree of Whispers. The reward cache you get from the Tree of Whispers can drop nightmare sigils. You need to know that nightmare dungeons scale to the sigil level, not your level. The higher the sigil level, the more modifiers and higher enemy levels you will face, but also the better your rewards will be. Make sure the nightmare dungeon enemies are at least 3 levels higher than you, because this will give you a 25% experience bonus. Anything higher will give you even more experience, but enemies will become harder to kill, so you should try to find a balance. To calculate this, remember that enemies inside nightmare dungeons will always be 54 levels higher than the tier of the sigil you use. For example, if you are level 71 and you want your enemies to be level 75, remember, at least 3 levels higher than you, then you have to use a tier 21 nightmare sigil. You can salvage unwanted nightmare sigils at the occultist to craft higher tier ones. This will help you get more challenging and rewarding dungeons. You can also try to craft sigils with magic find on them, as this will increase your chances of getting better loot during your dungeon run. Not all dungeons can become nightmare dungeons. Each season, a different set of dungeons will be available for nightmare dungeons. I'm saying dungeons a lot, but you guys get it. This is why you haven't seen more than around 20 different types of nightmare keys in your sigils so far. Use the sort button of your inventory to sort all sigils by tier level. This will help you find the sigils that is best suited for your desired difficulty and reward level. And last but not least, you can still do Whispers of the Dead dungeon objectives for the Tree of Whispers while doing Nightmare dungeons. Meaning you can use Nightmare sigils on dungeons that are part of the Tree of Whispers objectives, or quests if you will. Even though the sigil will hide the Tree of Whispers icon on the map, you will still get the credit for completing the dungeon. And that's it for this video. If you found it helpful or informative, please leave a like and subscribe. And maybe check back for more Diablo 4 or other good gaming content in the future. And also let me know in the comments what tips and tricks you have for tackling nightmare dungeons, and should I have missed any, or what topics you want me to cover next. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!